Hey everyone, we're going to get started on that first ingredient I mentioned in the responsive web design lecture, which is flexible grids. So if you haven't watched that yet, I recommend checking that out. It'll be really helpful when going over some of this stuff. So I'm using Visual Studio Code over here. I have the start of a project up here, and I have a little preview window here. So if I do something like this and save it, I can refresh this and it'll be there. It's a pretty cool extension that you can use to just make things a little bit faster. Alright, so the scenario that we're going to start with is I want you to pretend that a graphic designer has given you a mock-up and they want you to make it. So you just have this little link here, a little headline, and then we have a read more link. So first things first, we might want to mock this up in the browser. So we'll just erase that there. Just make a simple heading here. Get your own flying car today. And then we have a link. And we don't really have anywhere for it to go, so I'm just going to do this number sign here, and that just makes it refresh the page. Alright, and then read more. And then we have this little symbol here. The HTML code to make that is, there we go. So if I save that and refresh, alright, so we got this basic link set up over here. So now we might want to do some other CSS, like change these colors and the fonts and stuff like that. So we'll jump over and do some stuff in our CSS, which I'll put down here. Guess I'll put it here. There, you can still see it. One note on that, I am using a reset style sheet, so you may have noticed that even though this is an H1, it is displaying without basically any styling there. So that helps us get back to a baseline. I'm using the Eric Meyer reset.css. You can see I'm including it here. I've got my reset. And then I am next including my style sheet here, which doesn't have anything in it yet. Okay, so it's all included, so I can just get started over here. So maybe we want to change that background color. And when you get a mock-up like this from a designer, I already have this going down here. I'll just do it up here. Alright, when you get a mock-up like this from a designer, they'll usually give you all the colors, the fonts, and all that stuff too, so you would know what the values are of it. But for now, I can tell you D, C, D, B, D9 is the one. So if I refresh this, it should have changed. Okay. And then the font color is 2D, 2D, 2D. It's one of my favorite grays. Okay. And then now we're going to set the font. So we're going to approach this, we're going to make everything kind of fixed to start, use pixels, and then throughout the exercise we'll figure out how to take a lot of those pixel value out and make things flexible. So I can use the shortcut. So I could do font family, font size, font style, but if you just use font you can kind of combine those a little bit. So we'll make it a normal weight. This is the equivalent of font weight, and we're going to set it to 100% for now. I'll show you what that means in a second. And then we'll do Cambria. Actually, let's do Sego UI, which is a font that I have installed on my computer. You might not have it on yours. And then we'll do Ultima and Sans Serif. Okay, so what this 100% does is this is setting the font size. So by default, your browser normally sets the basic font size to about 16 pixels. So when you set 100% here, you're saying that you want all of the text to be at a baseline of about 16 pixels. And then because we're setting this 100%, we can do percentages of this and change it. So I'll just make a note of that. 100% is about 16 pixel font size. Okay, So now when I get down to my H1, let's say on the mock-up they had this set to like 24 pixels. So I would set 24 pixels, got my font size now, and it looks like it's italic, which I can do font size or font style italic. Let's see how that looks. Alright, so now you can already tell. Actually, I think I'm going to change this. It's supposed to be serif. So now it should be. There, now it's back as a serif font. Okay, so we got it italic, and now we just have to style this little link here. So we can do H1A if we only want to style anchor tags inside the H1. So I'll do that. Color we can set to 747477. These are colors that I just set them in Photoshop when I made the mock-up down here. And then for the font, we can do bold, and let's say it's supposed to be 11 pixels as per the mock-up. And then we'll switch up the font. We'll make it Calibri, Optima, Sans Serif. Okay, so we had a 24 pixel heading or header, and then we have an 11 pixel anchor tag. So I'll refresh that. It's a little small. Still a little small. Make sure I have that right. Okay, and then it looks like it's all caps, so we'll do text transform uppercase, text decoration, none. Alright, so we have it mocked up with. It looks pretty much like what you can see here. I might have the wrong font. This might be Cambria. I forget. I guess that looks more accurate. And then it also looks like they have letter spacing in here. We'll do maybe I could spell it correctly. We'll use our M tag. Alright, so that looks pretty much like that. That's good enough. Okay, so pixels are fine. We're using this 11 here, and we're using this 24 here, but they're not exactly flexible. So if I've, for example, had some feature on here where I wanted to scale the text size up and down for maybe an accessibility reason, you would have to manually change all of these values, which is not exactly scalable. So we want to use a unit that is a little bit more flexible, like the M that we used in this letter spacing here. So we can use this M to set the font size. And remember, an M unit is relative to the font size of the element. So for example, if by default this H1 was displaying at 24 pixels, or say it was displaying by default at 12 pixels, if I set this to 2M, then it would be twice that. Twice what it would normally display as. Okay, so I'll set this back to 24. So how do we convert these pixels into M? And we have this little formula, and I'll just write it down here, where you take the target divided by the context, which gives you the result. So the target is the pixel size, target pixel font size in our comp. So this is our comp that we're working off of. So the context, or the target, would be what it should be. And then the context is the font size of the current containing element. And when you divide them, it'll give us our result in M's. So our target here is 24 pixels, right? That's what we want it to be. And its current context, if I hadn't set this, what font size would it be by default? So it would be probably about 16, right? Because when I set this 100% here, it made everything equal to 16 pixels, more or less. So our context is going to be 16 pixels. So when you divide 24 by 16, you get 1.5. Okay, so we took our target, which is what we want it to be. We took our context, which is what it currently would be if you didn't change it. And we get 1.5 M. Alright, so let me comment that out. And we'll go up to here. Change it to 1.5 M. And you didn't see a change. And you shouldn't, because 1.5 M is the exact same thing as the 24 pixels, based on it being relative to this 100%. Okay, so we can plug pretty much all the pixels for these fonts into that formula and figure out what they should be. So it's the same size, but now it's relative and it's scalable and much more flexible. So next we want to move on to our anchor tag, which we currently have set to 11 pixels. Actually, one more note on here. Sometimes it could be useful to put in the math that you did here. So in this case, 24 divided by 16. So now whenever you go back and look at this, you know how you got to this 1.5. Alright. So for this one, it's set to 11 pixels. Okay. So we want to use that same formula, which would be, what's the target? Target is 11. And now what are we dividing it by? What would this anchor tag be set to if you weren't already changing it? So what is that default value here? And you might be tempted to put 16, right? Because you put this 100% up here, which makes everything on the page be 16 pixels. But because this is the context, meaning the font size of its containing element, the containing element is this H1, and the font size of the H1 is 24 pixels. So instead, you would do 11 by 24 here. So if you do that math, 11 by 24, you get a crazy number, but I'm going to use it anyway. 0.458, and then a bunch of 3's. So that's a pretty awful number. My unit is M. It's a pretty awful unit or number, but so you might be tempted to like round it to 0.46 or something, but you don't want to, because it's proportionally accurate. It's more proportional than if you had rounded it off or something like that. So we can leave this here. It looks ugly, and we can put these our little math equation out here so we know that how we arrived at it. So get rid of that. I go up here and I'll refresh and see again it didn't change. So what's even the point of this? Something that you might do, say instead of changing all of those values, say you wanted to make all the fonts slightly bigger on your across your entire page. If I change this to 150, save it, refresh, you can see that everything got bigger and it was proportional to each other. So this is still the same proportion to this one, and if I had paragraphs down here, they would have changed proportionally as well. So that's one of the reasons we do that. If I do 200, still proportional. So this is kind of an intro to how we can make our sites more flexible and better for different types of screens. So maybe something you could do is if you go to a mobile site and the text is way too big, you could also set this maybe to 90%. And now proportionally it's scaled again. Well, let's set that back to 100. Okay, so that's pretty cool. This section is supposed to be on grids though, and we haven't even touched the subject of that. But I wanted to show you this concept, this equation where you take the target, if I can type it, divided by the context, and you get that result that you want to plug in flexible units. And we can take this and we can use it to build layouts. So we're going to work on that next.